Good evening and welcome to another one of our nightly editions of Tisky Sour Quarantined. I'm Michael Walker. This evening we are going to be talking about a whole host of things. And we're going to start the show by talking about counting the cost of coronavirus. This is going to be in two sort of different themes. So one of them is deaths. And I've seen this a lot on Twitter, people discussing to what extent the deaths that are being announced by the government reflects the true figures of people who died because of coronavirus, and also how timely we received that. And then we're also going to talk about the cost in terms of hours lost. As you know, Aaron is the expert on political economy when it comes to coronavirus. And I am joined by Aaron Bastani for tonight's show. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Michael. How are you?
Very well. Same old. Every day is the same, isn't it? Every day I wake up, I don't go out, but I read about coronavirus, and then maybe go for a run. But instead of previously where I'd feel bad if I didn't go for a run, now I feel like I've just left more space on the pavement for other people to do their daily exercise.
How's in terms of exercise, keeping fit? How are you coping?
Well, probably I think I'm doing more exercise than before coronavirus.
Okay.
Because I've got a pull-up bar, and then I just get bored every now and again, so I do a few press-ups. It's not like a fitness regime that one could make a sort of YouTube video diary about. But I suppose just because I'm in my house more, I pass the pull-up bar more, so at least consider doing one.
I wish I had an easy bar, which is great for arms.
What is an easy bar?
It's shaped like that, so you can do very close arm workout.
Yeah, I've seen those.
You can experiment a lot. It's very good with triceps, French, nose crushers, skull crushers, they're called.
You should do a training. You should do a YouTube Navarra Media training.
You can't buy an easy bar now.
Oh. Too expensive, or just they're completely sold out?
There's no price gouging. You just can't find them.
Okay. Later in the show, in about 20 minutes, we're going to be joined by Matt Zarb-Cousin, former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn. Big figure on left Twitter, and most relevant to our show was the comms director for the Rebecca Long Bailey campaign. So we're going to talk about what went right, what went wrong on that campaign, and also the state of the Labour left, because lots of people want to know what was really going on behind the scenes. Why did it take a while for the campaign to launch? Things like that. And he'll have some great insights on what we should expect from Keir Starmer as well. But to the first of all, also tweet this show. In the comments under the description is a tweet which has the link for this show. We want more people to be watching it, and tweet on the hashtag Tisky Sour, of course. So one, an element that structures many of our days, if we're following very closely the announcements related to coronavirus, is the daily deaths, which the government announces sort of at about 5 p.m. And today, it was announced that there had been 854 deaths registered of people who died in hospital in the last 24 hours. That doesn't mean they died in the last 24 hours, but it was registered in the last 24 hours. That brings us to a total of 6,227. And we've spoken sort of numerous times on this program about how when you look at these new deaths as they come in, what we should do is look at them in the context of what was the contemporary government policy at the time when these people were likely infected, which I've been saying up to this point has been 23 days. And I've got that from a paper by Neil Ferguson at Imperial, which says that it's from the onset of symptoms to death. The average period of time is 18 days. But the average incubation period for the disease, so from the time that one is infected to when one starts coughing or having a fever, that's 5 days. So that adds up to 23 days. I read an article today, actually, which said that it's longer than that. And the reason it's longer than that is because it takes an average of 3 days between someone dying in hospital and their death being reported. So I just want to go to an article that was in the FT today, or a graph from the FT today, to show how this can quite seriously skew the information we're getting, not in a conspiratorial way, but just in a practical way that one should keep in mind. And so you can see that on March the 27th, this delay meant that the official figures that were going out on March the 27th actually underestimated the cumulative death toll by 80%. So you can see that this delay can make a real difference when it comes to how serious we think the crisis is, and to a degree makes this problem of the time lag of coronavirus politics, which I talk about a lot on this show. We're going to talk about a couple more issues that involve counting deaths. So one of them is a time lag, the other is where people die, and the other is this idea of excess deaths. But first of all, because we've recalculated this idea that if someone has died today, it's probably 26 days ago. Not if their death has been reported today. It was probably 26 days ago that they passed away. I just wanted to bring up another clip of a government advisor speaking. In this case, 25 days ago. So as I've already said, the government announced, I don't announce things. There were 854 people whose deaths were registered as happening in the last 24 hours. Those people were most likely to therefore have been infected on the, I should have had this down more properly, but on the 12th of March. This is what a chief advisor to the government, one of the heads of epidemiology in the NHS, was saying the day after that.
This weekend, will you go to the pub?
People can go to the pub as long as they have no symptoms. There is absolutely no restriction on their movements or what they do.
And what about slightly bigger gatherings, like a wedding, for example, where everybody knows each other, everybody's likely to kiss each other because it's a family thing? Do you think weddings are something that you shouldn't go to?
What we do know about the virus is that you're unlikely to be infectious when you don't have symptoms.
So from what we know now from that Financial Times article, the people whose deaths were announced today were most likely infected the day before. That guy, an NHS boss, said that there's no reason for people not to go to pubs. It's very difficult for people to spread coronavirus if they're asymptomatic. There's now a hell of a load of doubt about that in the scientific community. I don't know why the precautionary principle would bring you to say something like that when you weren't absolutely sure it was the case. But this is just the issues I've talked about now in terms of how one should interpret deaths just involve the lag. So how long it takes between someone dying of coronavirus and us finding out about it. There are also other issues which might not be, which aren't just about time periods. One of them is where people die. So the announcements we hear every day at 5 p.m. on the news, they're people who died in hospital. What that is not taking into account is people who died at home, what on the news they'll often call in the community. And they don't get counted in that. They might get counted, or they should get counted in the Office for National Statistics results, but that doesn't come out until about 10 days later. So in fact, the full death toll, including people who on their death certificate was written COVID-19 who died in hospital or at home, won't be known for 10 days after they died. So again, that sort of increases the time lag about coronavirus politics. And just finally on this topic, I wanted to bring up a very interesting article from The Economist, which was arguing that even taking into account people who died in hospital and died at home who were registered as dying for COVID-19, there are some people who, regardless of time lag, might never be included in the statistics. And those are people who either died of coronavirus and it was never considered to be a factor by either the doctors or whoever, or the coroner or whatever, because a test was never done or the assumption was never made. But also people who died because, as we know, coronavirus means that ICUs are packed, so people aren't getting the care they need. And I just want to go so that you can see sort of how significant this is. The Economist looked at two towns, one in Spain and one in Italy, to look at the extent of these excess deaths. So this is a region of Spain, Castile-La Mancha, and you can see that there are days in March where you have sort of 100 people dying confirmed of coronavirus, but there being 100 extra, or at least 100 extra excess deaths. And the same you're seeing in Nembro, which is a town in Italy, where you're seeing that the excess deaths are actually double the amount of people who are registered as dying directly from coronavirus. So this just shows you, the extreme costs of coronavirus, which is obviously relevant to the fact that, as we were talking about on Friday's show, there are people trying to downplay deaths from coronavirus by saying, these people who we're all considering have died, they would have died anyway. In fact, there's many people who are dying from this who wouldn't have died anyway, but we're also not taking into account. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, the excess death thing is really important. Also, you're going to have to think about the survival rates of people who, for instance, are suffering from stroke, heart disease, cancer. We won't know that for several months, probably not till the end of the year. You would get the median average of people who die on a month-by-month basis of a particular cancer or heart disease or stroke. And then you can index that year's data onto previous years, and we'll probably get a decent average. There are lots of people right now who aren't, for instance, being treated for various illnesses. And obviously, the worse this gets, and the more, for want of a better word, crippled ICUs become. I mean, Bergamo, Northern Italy, is the classic example. The worse this will be, as that chart very clearly depicted. Far worse even than Spain. Italy, of course, has the double bind of having a very old population. We have a better situation here in that regard. But yeah, the excess death thing, we probably won't know that really until the end of the year, maybe not even next year. And that's going to be a really high number. And it's one of the things, let's go back to work, which, by the way, if we, and people are sort of calculating the deaths, it would mean, okay, well, 100,000 deaths, but lost GDP would equal this number of deaths. Or, by the way, the numbers quoted in the Times from a Bristol University study, complete nonsense. But even if you accept them, we don't really have any statistical data about what happens when your entire healthcare system collapses on the basis of a single condition and the knock-on effects that has. One of the quotes that was in a Lancet article from an anonymous healthcare worker was something to the effect of, I want people to know in London, we no longer have a Western-style healthcare system. And that's basically what this does. And obviously, in the absence of a Western-style healthcare system, a high GDP country healthcare system, many, many, many more people die, perhaps even more than from the coronavirus itself.
And I mean, why this is going to matter, and why this is also, somewhat political, really, and why we do need to keep an eye, not in a conspiratorial way, but there needs to be absolute transparency about how deaths are logged, is because ultimately there is the one thing that actually makes me feel more confident in the government response than I otherwise would be, is that at the end of all of this, there's going to be a clear way by which you judge the success of a government, which is how they have fared, how many deaths there have been in this country compared to other countries. And obviously, we like to have clear metrics to understand the success, because it means that there'll be more accountability. And that's the metric I'd like them to use also. There was a concern at the beginning that they'd be more interested in economic growth instead of saving lives. But I think the fact that the death count is so obvious here makes it, introduces hopefully an element of an accountability there. Just before we move on from deaths and graphs, because we're going to talk about the economy, I just want to go to this one that I thought was very interesting that came out of the government press conference today, which is showing these cumulative deaths in different countries. And why I thought this was especially interesting is it's the first time where it's become really, really clear that within Europe, there is a different lower trajectory for deaths from coronavirus, as we've seen, previously. Spain, UK, Italy, France, they've all kind of hugged each other. They've all been going in the same direction. We've been critical of the UK government because we thought Italy didn't have the warning. We did, but in any case, they've been hugging. We're seeing now a new trajectory, which is Germany, much smoother, much lower. And what that shows you is that testing works, and also having loads of ICU capacity, having a lot of excess capacity in your health system, and the ability to ramp up testing, unsurprisingly, means there will be many fewer deaths from coronavirus than if you can't rely on those kind of things.
I think the classic one for comparativists is going to be Norway versus Sweden and Denmark. Sweden has a population twice that of Denmark, twice that of Norway, and it's got far more deaths. It will obviously have more deaths than both of them put together, or the same number of deaths, statistically likely, because it's got twice the population. But on a per head basis, far, far more than Norway. And I think that belies the argument more than anything else. Sweden went for an approach very similar to us. They maintained it for longer than we did, even though they have a bit more elasticity in the healthcare system to take on a crisis than we did. Norway immediately went with massive testing, social isolation, and if anything, has an even more generous healthcare system. So we're getting a really good picture of what does and doesn't work. And like you say, with healthcare, obviously a horrible thing to say, but life expectancy or mortality rates are really easy to measure. Or, often I've heard people say, well, the American healthcare system is better than Britain's. Well, infant mortality, women dying in childbirth, and life expectancy, Britain does better on all three. These are quite important things. So unlike happiness, or unlike educational attainment, or even productivity, this is a really substantial thing to measure, I think. And yeah, hopefully that will allow us to ascertain what countries did good things and what countries didn't.
We're going to now talk about, first of all, actually, you're watching the Vara Media, you're watching Tisky Sour. As you know, this show is only possible because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. If not, please go to varamedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, or however much you can afford given your financial situation in this incredibly unique period of time. Also, as ever, smash the like button on the video because it helps us in the algorithm. Our next story involves working hours. So this is the announcement from the International Labour Organization. Well, they've calculated the number of working hours they think have been lost due to coronavirus. I'm going to introduce this story with the write-up from the Financial Times. So they write, the coronavirus crisis will cut working hours by almost 7% worldwide in the second quarter of 2020, a catastrophic effect that is equivalent to the loss of 195 million full-time workers, the International Labour Organization said on Tuesday. The UN agency warned that 1.25 billion workers, almost 2/5 of the 3.3 billion strong global workforce, are employed in sectors suffering drastic falls in output, from retail and real estate to manufacturing, accommodation and food services. More than 4/5 of the global workforce live in countries where full or partial lockdown measures are in place. Aaron, I always introduce you as the guy who has, really got their eye on the political economy of these situations. How significant are these figures? And the fact that the working hours worked over the second quarter, so that's the second 3 months of this year, will be down 7% worldwide, or the equivalent of 195 million full-time workers.
I mean, they're just remarkable numbers. And what you don't see there is actually the region most affected by this is the Middle East, or the Arab countries. That's in a graph slightly lower down. And what we have to understand is right now coronavirus is working its way through, particularly the global north. Obviously, East Asia wouldn't historically be characterized as the global north, but South Korea, Japan, and Eastern China is very affluent, as of course are North America and Europe. One of the major concerns is when coronavirus goes to countries with less well-resourced healthcare infrastructures, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. Majority of the deaths of the 1918-1919 influenza pandemic were in South Asia. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be that combination of high unemployment, massive economic downturn, and a far more intense healthcare crisis than what we've seen. That may be hard to believe, but it's going to be the case in Europe and North America, afflicting these countries. As poor as I think the government's done on ventilators, or as abject as I think, for instance, Donald Trump is as the president of the United States, Britain, Italy can, to an extent, within several months, ramp up healthcare infrastructure, procure more ventilators. Citizens have enough disposable income to, buy more hand wash, hand sanitizer, face masks, things like that. In India, in Bangladesh, Pakistan, very, very difficult. Now, I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's going to be a challenge of an altogether different kind. And I think that, coupled with the economic downturn, is really, really big. The ILO, I think about a week ago, predicted that 25 million workers would lose their jobs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, compared to about 23 million after the 2009 crisis, 2008, 2009 crisis, the global financial crisis. Now, that might not sound like much more, but when you basically think that we've got furloughed workers in this country, in the United States, you've basically got loans being given to small businesses, which become grants if they keep workers on. To be losing more workers globally than we did with the global financial crisis, with these measures in place, by the way, that number's probably quite optimistic. I mean, this story really compounded it for me. And it demonstrates, like I say, the rest of the article, which I would really advise people to read, how this is going to be a global crisis. And in the Middle East, low oil prices, plus this healthcare pandemic, plus the economic hits, inevitably, you would look geopolitically at the kind of instability you saw around the Arab Spring. And again, it's all so massively integrated, global trade. It's said that 2/5 of the global workforce is directly affected. But then, think about the supply chains. Think about all the supply chains, agriculture, for instance, agricultural exporters who can no longer sell their produce onto their suppliers, the wholesale distribution people in Europe and North America. The idea that maybe half of the global labor market is impacted by one pandemic, this hasn't happened before. People talk about the Black Death that slowly worked its way around the world from India to Europe. But simultaneously in real time, it's just unprecedented.
Also, I suppose an important thing to consider when looking at figures like this is that, as James Meadway has written, we want an anti-war economy, which means we want a not an economy that's against war, although that would also be a good thing. But the idea that in war, what you want is your economy going at full capacity. What you want during an infectious pandemic, I suppose all pandemics are infectious, is to grind the economy to a halt. So that the less people going to work, the better. Obviously, some people can work at home, so that doesn't mean a lost working hour. But if everyone in the globe was who couldn't work at home was not working this month, that figure would be much higher than 7%. So you could say, in an odd way, we want that number to be higher. Obviously, the costs of that are going to be very different depending on which country you're in.
Here's the thing. So, for again, it goes back to how we're all integrated. You and I, Michael, we can broadly do what we do by working from home. As many jobs can be done from home. But the thing is, the revenue models for many of those businesses are dependent upon consumers having disposable income to buy their goods and services. You might be part of an environmental consultancy, and you consult businesses and you say, we can work out how you can make efficiency savings, reduce your carbon footprint, yada, 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 yada. But they might include a restaurant chain. Restaurant chain goes out of business. Well, you may be able to work from home, but your clients can't. So, assessing that knock-on effect is very, very difficult.
I mean, it's also why if you don't have a government that can borrow easily on financial markets, you're completely screwed. So obviously, like, our government is going into massive debt to pay anyone's wages who can't go into work. I mean, obviously, we've talked on this show about how that's not necessarily generous enough for people in casual employment or for self-employed people. They have to wait a bit. But, there's a package there. There's a package there that means you can continue life by not going to work. There'll be many places, many countries in the world where that's just not possible. So they have a much more painful choice to make between going to work and exacerbating a pandemic or having no money to live on. We'll go to a comment before we go to Matt. Linda Powell says, running a health service lean and mean will hopefully be a thing of the past here in the UK. Yes, I 100% agree with you. Fuck efficiency savings. No more efficiency savings after this. They were always, a terrible idea in terms of marketing foreign policy. The idea that say we'll run it at full capacity and that's a good thing. Aaron,
can I just say we've got a couple of super chats. We've got one from Thomas Clark, £20. Thanks for daily content. We had a bit earlier on. We had Billy Pilgrim, £5. Keep up the good work, comrades. Thank you, comrade. And as Michael's already said, 1,427 watching, only 508 thumbs. Smash the like button. What are you doing? It doesn't cost you a thing. Make me happy.
We will. I think someone in the comments mentioned Boris Johnson. We'll mention Boris at the very end of the show once we've got Matt Zarb in, and probably the final thing to mention. In a way, there's not that much to say about it, which is why I didn't lead with that story on today's show. Okay, let's bring in Matt Zarb-Cousin. Can we get you in?
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, great, thanks. How's self-isolation? You enjoying it? Lockdown.
I love self-isolation. I feel a bit bad because everyone's talking about the costs of everyone's quite rightly saying the costs of this lockdown are huge, and whilst it's correct to be safe in terms of minimizing the harm that coronavirus causes, we have to recognize how difficult this is for people. And I'm kind of just sitting here thinking I'm fine with this. I just sit on my laptop, sit on my balcony, go for a run maybe once every 2 days, and I have no pressure to do anything else, which is perfect for me.
Definitely.
My only problem was my Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough. But
yeah, well, I know people who work in the NHS, and obviously they're going to work every day, having to operate under extreme pressure, extreme circumstances, putting themselves in harm's way. So having to stay in my house is just it's not the end of the world, is it? So
also, also the big thing there is also we're safe at home, right? Because it's not only that the people who work in the NHS have to go out and endure stress and see loads of death all the time, or even bus drivers, people working in the supermarket, working incredibly hard,
exactly.
More stressed people than usual, but also they're way more likely to get coronavirus than any of us because we're lucky and privileged enough to be able to stay at home.
Exactly.
In any case, we've got you fresh off the leadership campaign. What was do you want to explain what your role was on the Becky Long Bailey campaign?
So I was brought in early January to head up communications. So in my team was obviously we did press, digital communications, we did events. Events fell under my team as well. And really I was involved from what was the early stages of the campaign, building up the campaign team and working on messaging, working on interventions, strategic interventions that were made throughout the campaign. So yes, it's been a very, very long campaign. Obviously, it's been a long 3 months, very intense and very, very unique and unusual circumstances, I would say, particularly for the left. I don't think we've been in this position before, where we've just lost very badly in a general election, and having to deal with the consequences of that for the, in terms of the political context and where we go from there. And it's been a learning curve, I think, from my perspective. I think we made some mistakes in how we read the Labour membership. I mean, these are the things that I've learned in the campaign. And I think it's really important that the left learns the right lessons. And I think that Jeremy Corbyn won in 2015 because he was the only anti-austerity candidate. And because he was the only anti-austerity candidate, he was able to unite the soft left and the hard left and the paper members. And the paper members, they want to win an election. They're broadly left-wing. They're anti-austerity. They're social democrats. And Jeremy Corbyn was the only person standing up for social democracy in that 2015 leadership contest. And then I think this time around, the soft left and the paper members, they sort of grew, obviously, disaffected and disillusioned with the left, with Corbynism as a project. Corbynism, from their perspective, ended on the 13th of December, and that project ended, and it was time for something new from then on. And I just want to just read out a couple of things that I think illustrate this very well. So this is from YouGov polling in December of Labour members. So 44% of Labour members thought that Labour should be more centrist. 32% had no preference, 14% don't know. But this was a crucial one. Do you think Corbynism, or Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, changed the party for the better? Only 12% said yes. Changed the party for the worse, 56%. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's really important that the people have recognised that this wasn't a case of just Jeremy Corbyn handing the baton to the next leader, the next person that he wanted to succeed in. We just lost the general election. And I think that the campaign really was difficult to mobilise people because we were trying to appeal to the soft left. And we had to appeal to the soft left because, as I just illustrated with that polling, we'd lost them quite badly. Jeremy Corbyn's coalition had splintered and fractured. So I think by focusing the campaign on trying to appeal to the soft left, we didn't mobilise enough people. So that's my kind of analysis is, Jeremy Corbyn mobilised a lot of people. People knew what his politics were. He'd been around for decades. They knew what he stood for. And he was able to bring that coalition together. And I think it was very difficult for, in the current context, to do the same thing.
I just want to focus on that polling, first of all, because was that a private poll?
No,
I hadn't seen that before.
That was in the public YouGov polling, yeah. So,
but seriously, only 12% of people thought that Corbyn and Corbynism made the Labour Party better, who were Labour members.
Yes, exactly. So that was what we did, and then we were
by. That's very damning, in fact.
Well, exactly, and this is the thing. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but this is how people were feeling after the election. People were going through a grieving process. And people were thinking, I don't want that to ever happen again. I don't want to ever lose an election again. Of course, you will lose elections, general elections, but people were feeling in that moment, that they wanted to grasp for something that seemed to make sense in the context of trying to win an election. And look, Keir Starmer, I think our campaign succeeded in making sure that he made commitments, those 10 commitments on policy that we can now hold him to. And I think that, on a policy level, I think he appealed to most members. Most Labour members are probably in that kind of ballpark on a policy level. I thought they run a very good campaign. I spoke to Simon Fletcher after, congratulated them on the campaign, obviously, and Ben Nunn, who's just been made Director of Communications. They're going to do, I wish them all the best. The last thing they need is people sniping at them. But I think that in that moment, after the election, I think we underestimated as a movement how many people in the Labour Party, how many Labour members were ideological socialists. I think we overestimated how many were ideological socialists. And I think after 2017, we overestimated in the country the appeal of democratic socialism. And I think that where we were in 2017 was probably about where the country was. And I felt like in 2019, we perhaps had an offer, had a manifesto that was a bit like if we'd been in government for 2 years. So, I mean, Keir going back a little bit on those things, it probably resonates with the members not going as far as 2019. I think that's probably where most of the members are. So what I'm saying is, look, we've got a leader now we can work with. I think, you know, there will be an opportunity to influence, and there will be an opportunity to scrutinise on a policy level. And I think that the right of the party is going to marginalise itself. It's going to keep throwing stones and keep briefing the press and negatively and undermining the whole project. And whereas on the left, I think it's so important that we just respect the outcome of the vote. Keir won. We respect votes. We respect the legitimacy of his leadership. Work with him, and rebuild those alliances with the soft left, because I think that is so important now, is that we don't let the Blairites back in.
Matt, does it sort of, I mean, for me, I hear all of that and I agree with pretty much all of it, but do you not think there's a kind of there was a basic failure with the campaign, which perhaps you've already highlighted about the need to reach out to the soft left, which was that it just wasn't exciting. Keir Starmer was never going to make it an exciting campaign, and Rebecca Long-Bailey failed to make it an exciting campaign. And actually something quite dull and predictable always suited him, always played to his strengths. And I do wonder, I completely understand, I think Rebecca Long-Bailey was never going to, and I would agree with that conclusion. And I think that the idea, if she pitched herself as a continuity Corbyn candidate, she wouldn't have won either. But for me, it was, well, why should she be any more continuity Corbyn than Keir Starmer? Keir Starmer had a more senior role. She's younger. She's a woman. She's got great green credentials. You could have had a very shiny, happy, high energy launch, lots of young people, green politics, new economy, excitement, and people wouldn't even be talking about Jeremy Corbyn. And so I wonder if, I agree with you, if you run as a continuity Corbyn candidate, that's precisely what's going to happen. But in the absence of offering something new and exciting, your opponents did that anyway. Do you think that was something of an issue? She didn't really hit the ground running. There wasn't that energy. And if so, why was that?
Well, first of all, continuity Corbyn wasn't something that wasn't like a message that we had crafted. It was a label that was attributed to her, which I thought was very unfair from the start. And it was something that we did our best to push back on. But I think in terms of the launch, the actual official launch of the campaign, I thought that was actually probably one of the better moments of the campaign. I thought it was high energy. It was a lot of young people. It looked slick. It was well put together. She did a series of very, very good broadcast clips. She did very good sit-down interviews. On a comms level, on a political level, I thought it was very, very effective. And actually, it reset the campaign, because it did, as you said, it did get off to a slower start, because obviously she had not been planning a leadership run. She was still thinking about it over Christmas. It's a massive undertaking and a massive commitment. And, you know, I don't blame anyone for thinking very carefully about whether they want to do it. But Keir Starmer was obviously planning his campaign quite a lot in advance of the general election. And that showed, and he was able to get off to a flying start, launched a very, very good video that addressed a lot of the concerns that the members might have had with him. And look, I mean, I think we did everything we could in announcing things that were radical and exciting: open selections, BBC reform. We announced like party democracy reforms. We announced things that we were going to do in the party to try and win an election, like change the whole approach to communications and how the party relates to people and members and communities. Reset the relationship with the trade union movement. Like, there were lots of things that were good and like radical, but you can only announce them, make sure they get good showing in the press and in broadcast. But if they don't cut through to people, which is going the next level, that suggests that there just isn't the enthusiasm for the contest. And I think that's what we suffered from, is there wasn't people willing to engage. People were just feeling really defeated. They were feeling deflated by the whole thing.
I just want to, so two things, just as an appendage to what you've just said, Matt. So there was, from the sounds of it, and this is what I've heard elsewhere, there was no succession planning from the leader's office in terms of what happens next after the December result.
No, there wasn't.
There was no succession planning.
No. So
you would say that was one of the major reasons why Keir Starmer came out of the blocks, neutralised the criticisms in a way that Rebecca Long-Bailey. So already she was starting from a difficult position because of Labour losing, and then the absence of a succession plan kind of sealed the deal.
Yes, the fact that people thought we might have a chance at one stage of catching up was a real testament to her and to the team, because we in the early stages there was nothing. And we got everything up and running, and it looked like a decent campaign, and we were making good.
The launch was great, yeah, I remember.
And I thought she did a series of very, very good interviews where she came across very well. I think she's very capable. I think she's very diligent. She's across the detail. I think she's good. Good candidate, a very good person to work with. But Keir was way ahead, and he was way ahead because he had the infrastructure in place, and he had the people in place, and he had the money. And that was what we were trying to nail him on. We were saying, surely that candidates should have to disclose who their donors are. Now, so not only was there not a succession plan, the rules of the game weren't exactly in our favour as well. We were accused in the beginning of being in with the bureaucracy of the party and all this kind of stuff, and you're the kind of chosen campaign and all this stuff, which was complete nonsense, because if that was true, then they would have said that all candidates have to declare their donors up front. And then that would have been actually quite helpful, because, well, not just helpful to us, on a cynical level, but also fair, I think. And, members have a right to know that stuff.
I think that 12% was the general public. I've just looked it up. It doesn't sound, it's the link I'm on it say, I think it's the general public, only 12% think he changed the party for the better, and 56%
Labour members is 27%.
Labour members is okay, so that's still not great.
And change the party for the worst, 36%.
And that's Labour members who think it was change the party for the worst.
Yes.
Okay. So even among Labour members, they're not particularly enamoured with Corbynism at this point in time.
Should be more centrist is 44% public, 43% Labour members. So there's very little difference there.
You see, it's such a broad category. I like the idea of Labour being more rhetorically centrist. I like the idea of Labour wearing nice suits and going, we just want to just calm things down, reset the economy, and not the idea of, maybe being rhetorically radical isn't a thing. I think that was one of the successes of the 2017, like you say, the manifesto. Yeah. It just tapped into a common sense, and people went, yeah, why don't we do that already? Is that centrism?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that there's a difference between being centrist on a kind of ideological level on the spectrum of so what is that, social economic liberalism, and where the public centre of gravity is. I mean, most people would say I'm a centrist because they see themselves as the arbiter of common sense, and that is sort of the proxy, right? So, it's things that are radical but seem reasonable to the public. And radical given where we are. So, not taxing corporations the level that they were taxed in 2011 isn't radical. It's pretty reasonable, and reasonable to most people. But given where we were, it was kind of quite a radical shift. It was increasing it by a substantial amount. Equally, free tuition fees isn't particularly radical. It's the case across Europe. And this was one of the things Becky was trying to say in the campaign, is that we need to articulate what we stand for, and we need to articulate our vision for the country in terms that don't frighten people, in terms that do appeal to people's sense of what's to be expected.
What do you think is next for the Labour left then? Because I think some of those conclusions you've come out with, they're quite strong. It feels like why you think Rebecca Long-Bailey sort of lost the campaign, which is that actually. And this is something we've talked about on the show in terms of Bernie Sanders also not winning the Democratic primary, an excellent candidate, is that maybe, the public, let alone the members, aren't as far left as people like us on Novara Media might have hoped they were. So if that is the conclusion you've come to, what role do you think the Labour left do play in the Labour Party now? How do you see the left organising? What role do they have? How do you think momentum, for example, should relate to a leader like Keir Starmer?
Well, I think the left has to support the leadership. It has to, doesn't mean uncritically support it, come what may, on everything it does, but support trying to attain a Labour government and not be wreckers, and contribute constructively, be as constructive as possible, and contribute ideas. And I think those ideas, you know, for example, Jonathan Reynolds is going to be the shadow DWP secretary. He's in favour of universal basic income. I think they're going to be receptive to radical ideas. I think this is very, very different to Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband, he still had the Blairites kicking about, and he had to accommodate them. And I don't feel like Keir has felt like he has had to accommodate them to the extent that Ed Miliband had to. I don't think he wanted to. So I think it's a very, very different story now, and we are still influential in this context. But if we marginalise ourselves, we won't be. So I think we have to contribute constructively and be as constructive as possible, and as I say, rebuild that alliance with the soft left.
Was that a conscious reason why Rebecca Long-Bailey was so rarely sort of even, let alone attacked, she barely criticised Keir Starmer? So one of the things I thought in terms of that would have made her victory more likely would have been, for example, if, say, she jumped on Keir Starmer when in the morning he said he wouldn't speak to the Sun during a Labour leadership election, and then in the afternoon said he would do after a Labour leadership election. And I thought at the time Rebecca Long-Bailey should really be going, Keir Starmer is a flip-flopper over this. But there is, you know, the alternative position, I suppose, is that if she already saw the writing on the wall and saw that Keir Starmer was going to lead this particular race, then she didn't want to make an enemy of him, given that she knew he was ultimately at some point going to be her boss and going to decide whether or not she'd be in the shadow cabinet, and whether or not he would embrace the left or see them as an enemy. Was that potentially why Rebecca Long-Bailey held her tongue?
I don't think so. I think it was more she was reluctant to do attack for many of the same reasons Jeremy was, which is that particularly attacking on her own side. She didn't feel comfortable doing that. She didn't feel comfortable attacking other candidates. So I think that's fair enough in a leadership context, particularly when you're seen as the continuity candidate of the bureaucracy in the leader's office, even if there was no succession plan. You're seen as that. I think there was a feeling of like, we're going to put forward a positive vision. We're not going to attack the other. I don't know. It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right at the hustings to do it. The hustings were not set up for that kind of antagonism. It didn't feel right to do it in the press. And I felt like Keir was running a positive campaign, and they did a good job of that. And if we're attacking him, it can look a bit desperate.
I've got two questions for you, Matt. Quickly, do you think aspirational socialism was a good frame? That's the first one. And then secondly, do you think that there was a failure generally with the campaign, in so much as very quickly Lisa Nandy got to represent herself as the candidate for the non-London members, the non-metropolitan members, sort of in touch with working class Labour supporters, voters, got an endorsement from the NUM, got an endorsement from the GMB. I saw that all happening, and I just thought this should all be happening for Rebecca Long-Bailey. Maybe not the actual endorsement from the GMB, but it seemed to me that there was an attempt to frame Rebecca Long-Bailey as the kind of young millennial momentum candidate, which is great. You need that. Corbyn had those people. But at the same time, there wasn't an attempt to reach out to the other parts of his vote, which really matter. You've already said the soft left, but also older people who might be in Leave voting seats, where, the CLP has just been through thick and thin together, where there's a very different political economy, a very different political conversation to Manchester, to Brighton, to London. So those are two questions, the aspirational socialism one, and then the inability really to go beyond a younger metropolitan sort of demographic.
So first of all, the NUM is about 10 old blokes sitting in someone's front room.
But it was symbolic, wasn't it?
Sorry?
It was symbolic though, wasn't it?
Well, okay, fine. But I wouldn't read too much into the NUM. And the GMB were not, hugely supportive of obviously the Green New Deal and that kind of green radicalism that Rebecca wanted to represent. So I think that those things have to be taken into account. And I think that it was actually pretty inevitable that Lisa would get the GMB nomination. I would say as well, though, that Lisa was in a unique position in the race, particularly in the final three, because she wasn't having to, or feeling like she was having to, defend the previous leadership. So she did have this kind of freedom. I think it looked like a freedom to say what she wanted, and she looked like more like the straight talking, honest politics candidate, which is the space that Jeremy occupied in 2015. But if you are the establishment, if you are the bureaucracy, if you do represent, or you have to be accountable for the decisions that were taken by the leadership, it's very difficult to do that. We weren't outsiders, we weren't insurgents. We were running a very, very different campaign to Jeremy in 2015 and Jeremy in 2016. And we had to. And it was about the context. And I think that people have to bear that in mind. Like, Jeremy was the right person to lead the Labour Party in 2015. And he was the right person to lead the Labour Party in 2016. And Labour members, that's why they voted for it. But I feel like the context changes, things move on. And I think Jeremy Corbyn was the person who had the best chance of winning that election in 2017 of all the candidates that stood in 2015, obviously more than Owen Smith. I think his brand of insurgent, anti-establishment politics nearly did the job in 2017. And, I think it was come very, very close, basically. In 2020, we're in a different world now. We've lost the general election. Members are looking for something different, and I think we have to recognise that we can't just keep running the same campaign again and again.
We've got a couple of questions I want to throw in from the audience. Spiritual Human asks, was RLB campaign consciously or by consequence of just running, making sure Keir Starmer expressed socialist credentials, thereby pushing his campaign more left than it may have wanted? And Derby PA asks, will we ever get to know who funded Sir Starmer? I might just jump in on that second one, actually. I think in the next edition of Private Eye, Solomon Hughes today tweeted that it's going to become apparent that a major funder for Change UK was one of Keir Starmer's funders, but it won't be named until that edition of Private Eye comes out. He's a journalist for Private Eye. But Matt, I'll go to you for, that first question, and then if you've got any goss on the second one. Was it a conscious decision, or just by consequence of RLB standing that Keir Starmer was pushed to the left? And I suppose, to what extent do you think he was pushed to the left?
That's a very good question. I think by consequence, it wasn't conscious. Obviously, I think it's important that the left runs in leadership contests to be standard bearers for a particular type of politics, to stick big red flags in the ground and start conversations and affect the discourse on policy. I think it's very important. But I think what we were able to do is, I think, draw Keir out to much firmer commitments just by making those commitments ourselves and being in the contest. I think that was a consequence. That wasn't the reason that Rebecca ran. Obviously, Rebecca was in it to win it. But yes, I think the outcome was better than it would have been if she didn't run. And in terms of so just to finish that point, I think it's really important now that as an organised left, we hold the leadership to those commitments. I think it's absolutely fair. It's absolutely fair enough to hold the leadership to policy commitments and to scrutinise them and Keir on those commitments. I don't think that's wrecking. And I think that we have to draw the distinction between that and what the Labour right does. And I think it's really important that they remain marginalised. And will we ever get to know who funded Keir Starmer? Well, look, I wanted to do a direct mail shot like he did. It would have cost £300,000. So, which was pretty much all the money that we had. So someone was funding it, or some people, individuals, entities were funding it. And I think, look, I don't think we were unfair asking if they would disclose who those donors were in the interest of transparency. We believe it's a principled issue for us, I hope that those donors, whoever they are, don't exert a huge amount of influence over him. But you don't get something for nothing in life and in politics. So that was my worry, is like, if he wins, is he going to owe all these people, influence, and therefore it's going to be more difficult to keep him left. So that was
yeah. I don't know how much influence you're going to get over Keir Starmer for 300 grand. I feel like that was there were just so many rich people who were fucking desperate to get rid of a Corbynite from the Labour Party because they wanted depending on how you look at it, an opposition which conformed more to the type of what they expect from Westminster politicians, which you might look at as protecting the vested interests of the powerful, you can frame it however you want. Aaron, do you want to come in, or shall I go to a question from an audience member?
You go in. Go on, ask more.
Okay, so TH Wolf, this is a very good question. I think this is going to be actually the key question, or one of the key questions for Keir Starmer going forward. Is the Labour Party under Keir Starmer able to bring the progressive younger voters along that will need to stand a chance at the next general election? Does he have that kind of appeal or instinct? I have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to go to you first. Who wants to take that, Matt?
Go on, Matt. You're the guest.
I think so. I think he can, and I think that really it comes down to policy. And I think if he can keep a lot of the policies that were in the 2019 manifesto that appealed to younger people, he's already talked in the campaign about abolishing tuition fees. He's appointed Rebecca as Shadow Education Secretary, so I feel like that commitment is safe. Obviously, I think there's space to go much further, but we don't know what the world's going to be like in 2024. You spoke obviously at the beginning of the programme before I came in about like how much economic upheaval and turmoil there's going to be as a result of the coronavirus. So like how we rebuild and what the economy looks like next month, let alone next year, it's difficult to say. And obviously the election's not till 2024. So I think he's going to have to be radical in his offer. And if he can combine radicalism with credibility, or the appearance of credibility, and inspire confidence in older voters, then I think the policies will do the rest for younger voters.
I think he's going to really struggle to keep a lot of younger voters. The reason being one of his USPs, his big sort of selling point, is respectability politics. And by doing the respectability politics stuff, how authentic does it look if Keir Starmer's talking to Stormzy, when he goes on to Lad Bible? Now, that doesn't win you elections. Jeremy Corbyn did all of that stuff, and I'm not suggesting it does win you elections. But the secret sauce is in keeping that coalition Jeremy Corbyn got, which was more than 10 million people last year in December, which was still a failure, but that was more than either Ed Miliband or Gordon Brown or Tony Blair in 2005. How do you keep that coalition together and then get an extra 2-3 million? And I think even just keeping that coalition together is quite hard, especially if there's any sort of departure, if they leave behind a lot of left-wing policies. We've already seen it with Ed Miliband between 2010 2015. The Green Party in 2015 got almost 1 million votes. I don't think that could be necessarily repeated, because I think the behaviour of the Green Party in the last several years has really exposed them for what they are. But it's got to be a concern. Young people aren't going to young people and ethnic minorities, by the way. This is a front bench now. There's not a single. There's Lisa Nandy, who's mixed race, mixed heritage, has got a senior role. But other than her and David Lammy, there's no real. And then you've got Marsha de Cordova. But Diane Abbott was Shadow Foreign Secretary. You've got a lot of BAME people who aren't there anymore in senior roles. So why should BAME people vote Labour if they're not seeing representation of BAME people at the top levels of the party? Labour take these people for granted, and I think they do so at their, at their own peril. So I think he will struggle. But I think the solution there is the left needs to recompose itself, and bloody quickly, through the socialist MPs in Parliament, through the left trade unions, Unite, CWU, FBU, Bakers Union, through Momentum, through TWT. And what I think is actually, in many ways, the most important takeaway here is that the next 3 months are more important than the last 3 months. That might sound crazy, because you had a decent candidate with a decent chance of, she came second. You have to bear in mind that until Jeremy Corbyn, radical left candidates came last or didn't run in Labour leadership contests. But the next 3 months matter more than the last 3 months, because now it's about recomposing, re-solidifying those left forces. And I don't think Labour can win an election without them actually having the House in order. And also, I don't think Keir Starmer will have a concrete centre-left policy proposal without them having their House in order. Because all the countervailing pressures, as we said yesterday, from the media, from the Parliamentary Labour Party, from the Tories, from big business, take it right. And unless you have a powerful, coherent left to stop that, to mitigate it, and actually hopefully to drag it in the opposite direction, and at the same time building consent in public more broadly for that programme, I think Labour have big problems. So it's in Keir Starmer's interest, I would argue, perhaps a bit of a counterintuitive argument. It's in Keir Starmer's interest, if he wants to be the Prime Minister, for the left to organise itself, to mobilise itself quickly and effectively.
I mean, I'd make, well, unsurprisingly, I suppose, I'd make exactly the same argument. I mean, I do think that why Keir Starmer's position is so interesting right now is that on an institutional level, the left really don't have very much leverage at all, because I think that Keir Starmer could quite easily demote all the lefties from shadow cabinet. He can sack Jenny Formby. No one in the media is going to care. They're just all going to clap. Most of the PLP will just clap, and it's not as if sort of Rebecca Long-Bailey or anyone on the left is going to be given a chance to wreck his chances, because they won't get airwaves in the same way that Wes Streeting or Jess Phillips did. Also, they're just numerically weaker in the Parliamentary Labour Party than the right were. So whilst Keir Starmer, if he wanted to, I think could tomorrow basically purge the left from the Labour Party, the reason I hope he won't is because he has enough foresight to realise that the only way he's going to win a general election is by keeping the left on board, for two reasons. One, because they're his only bolster and ballast against the right, taking him down as they took down Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband didn't have really anyone to the left of him, and that meant that he was completely in hock to the people to the right of him, and it meant that we went into the 2015 general election with completely wishy-washy offer that just didn't inspire anyone. At the same time, I think this does come down to this youth question. And I think the only way that the Labour Party is going to win at this point really is by looking like a coalition. Because, I'm not convinced that Keir Starmer himself as a person is going to be able to mobilise young voters. I think it's going to be perfectly acceptable to young voters. I don't think he's going to switch them off. But he does need a dynamic, pluralist youth wing of the Labour Party to be making sure that people turn out at the next general election, because you cannot take young voters for granted. That's something that we, the last 5 years of electoral history have proven beyond doubt.
We can't take young voters for granted, of course not. But I mean, I do think that the real problem Labour has is with older voters. I think that is the big problem. They didn't want to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. We do have to find a way. In 2017, a lot of them stayed at home. A lot of them, because of the dementia tax, they didn't bother. We've got to find a way of trying to win back some of those older voters. And I just feel like, yes, okay, we can keep the younger people. Hopefully we can, with the policies that hopefully Keir is going to stick to. And I do think that we can, as you said, we can ensure that we put pressure on the leader to make sure that he sticks to those commitments. But I also think that he knows that when the right come for him, it's only going to be the left that defends him. And he'd be mad to alienate the left at any stage, because I think it's true. I think if the right come for him, the left would defend him. And I think, as I say, it all comes back to the alliance between the soft left and the left. If we can build that, maintain that, then we'll be in a much, much better position as a movement.
I think it's probably undeniable that of the three candidates, it is Keir Starmer who's potentially going to be the most appealing to all, like Sir Keir Starmer with the great hair.
Exactly.
Potentially older voters will swoon at that, more so than they did at Ed Miliband. We're going to finish soon, but first of all, we should just mention, I suppose, Boris Johnson in ICU. We talked about it in much more depth yesterday, but it is the big story of the day. I mean, someone's asked another cue. If Matt wasn't on Tysky Sour tonight, would you have been clapping for Boris at 8 p.m? And then I'm going to link that to a broader question, which is what do you think the political implications of Boris Johnson being in intensive care are going to be? How should the Labour Party respond? I mean, if it responds, what are the political dynamics at play right now, given that the Prime Minister, in a fairly unprecedented situation, is in intensive care?
Well, look, my thoughts and prayers are with everyone who's in intensive care, including the Prime Minister, and with his family as well, particularly Carrie Simmons, who obviously his fiancée, who is pregnant. I did feel very odd yesterday, to be honest. I felt like, my dad's got coronavirus. He's got very mild symptoms. He's in Malta at the moment. They're testing everyone, so he tested positive, even though he had mild symptoms. I did feel very strange. It was like, it really brought home how many people are going to get this virus. The Prime Minister's got it, and he's in intensive care, and how serious it is. I don't know why. I don't know why. Most people, I think it's a natural thing to like not think it's going to happen to everyone, you know. And then when someone really high profile gets it, it's like, oh my God, it's real. Like, so that I think people were going through those kind of emotions yesterday. Would I have clapped? I don't think me clapping him would have done much good. But like, I mean, I don't know if anyone watching is religious, but I pray for him. I pray for everyone who's in intensive care of this horrible infectious disease. But yes, I mean, look, we can only hope that as many people as possible who go into intensive care come out healthy again.
Aaron, political impact. What have you thought watching the media response today?
Well, it's, you know, what's interesting is you see people saying, oh, can somebody collate a list of all the leftists that are being, you know, saying horrible things, and, you know, we can all block them. It's just ridiculous. There's two things at work, and obviously I would say I want Boris Johnson to get better as soon as possible. Two reasons why. First is he's a human being. He's somebody's dad. You know, I can relate to that. If my dad was in hospital with this, I'd feel terrible. I'd be, you know, broken. And if he died, of course, it'd be even worse. Secondly, from a political perspective, you know, you don't beat people's ideas through one or two people passing away or a scandal, which is obviously what happens more frequently, and they have to step out. And this was something Tony Benn said about Thatcher. You know, Tony Benn said it wasn't Thatcher, the politician, who was the problem. It was that she was a teacher. That was his big problem with her. And he said Labour hadn't had a teacher since Nye Bevan. And he was most worried about how her ideals had become the common sense of the country. So the idea that a person is a necessary reflection, that they embody their politics to the extent that if they disappear for whatever reason, corruption, they, you know, depart politics, personal reasons, or in this case, you know, health reasons, that's an inadequate understanding of politics. And in many ways, if only it was that simple. Actually, politics is about persuading millions of people very hard. It takes lots of work, takes lots of cooperation. So there's 2 points there. Obviously, hope he gets better. At the same time, the idea that, you know, this changed anything politically, not really. A politician will always just be replaced by somebody else. It's about the prevailing ideas under which we're governed. And I just want to say one more thing as well. After, you know, trying to be as sympathetic as I can, which obviously I am very sympathetic with this. We've got 1,655 people watching, only 952 thumbs. Smash the like button. And if you like what you're watching, go to Novara Media /support. We're trying to build a new media for different politics. One of the stories we've not had time to talk about today is how all the Sun journalists are tweeting about how you need to buy a newspaper as an act of workers' solidarity, but also civic duty. So it's as absurd as it is funny. Fortunately, we don't have to have people buying a print product from a shop for us to be viable. Maybe on the other side of this, the Sun won't be around, but Novara Media will be bigger and better than ever. To help us do that, go to novaramedia.com/support.
And unlike the Sun, we will never smear dead people, or like they did to the victims of the Hillsborough disaster, nor run leader articles saying to sack the doctors and then, you know, wholeheartedly backing the clap for the NHS a couple of years later, because we're not like that. I suppose final point, you mentioned this idea on Twitter of, you know, people saying this Boris Johnson situation is one of many situations, a real phenomenon on Twitter now, where my timeline is full of people saying like, oh, there's a real gutter out on Twitter tonight. And I can't actually see a single tweet of anyone being, you know, horrible about the guy in ICU. But I mean, I'm sure there is some, but there's a lot of performativity about this sort of thing, isn't there? In any case, Matt Zarb, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me. No, it's been brilliant. Thanks, guys.
And best wishes to your dad.
Thanks very much. I'll pass those on.
And Aaron, always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Tell me, what guest do we have on tomorrow night, Michael?
Well, we should have. I was going to do it as a surprise guest because I need the 100% confirmation email that I sent today. But we should have ex-Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis.
Wow.
Tomorrow at 8 p.m. And it's an incredibly timely moment to have him on because there is a really big deal Eurogroup meeting tonight where they're going to be deciding the EU's rescue package. Obviously, I mean, as we've spoken about before, when David Adler was on the show, the politics of coronavirus are much more complicated in the European Union, because it's not just as if countries can quite easily borrow money in their own currency to pay these increased unemployment benefits, etc. Germany's in a position to do that. Italy and Spain are kind of screwed unless they come up with something very big at that meeting tonight. So I'm sure that Yanis Varoufakis will have a hell of a lot to say about all of that. So make sure you are tuned in to Novara Media tomorrow at 8 p.m. Good night.